Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. I saw John Spencer post an article over on X that he actually wrote himself. And if you don't know who John Spencer is, he is one of the foremost experts when it comes to urban warfare. He is probably the expert when it comes to urban warfare, and he's actually a brilliant mind, especially when it comes to what's going on over in Israel and Gaza at the moment. And well, he weighed in, as we all know, on the Dave Smith Douglas Murray debate, which has, again, still, even a couple of weeks on, is still blowing up the internet in such a way that lots of people are still having conversations about it. I'll be making another video. Russell Brand is actually now getting into the mix and asking loads of important questions and saying whether or not, or asking whether or not Douglas Murray and Sam Harris having a conversation about what's going on over in Israel at the moment and whether or not you can trust the experts that haven't actually necessarily been over there, and comedians just talking about it all the time, whether we want that and whether or not that is considered to be totalitarianism or elitism, as it were. And to be honest with you all, I personally do not think that what Douglas said was wrong in any kind of way, shape, or form. Could he have said it a lot better? Potentially, yes, but he didn't miss a mark at all. I personally don't think that he missed the mark during the debate. But nevertheless, Dave Smith certainly did. And Dave Smith, his whole entire argument was towards the morality of war. Let's get into why it is Israel is going after Palestinians, or why they're going after Hamas, and they're just killing the likes of innocent children, as it were. Let's look at the moral framework surrounding that, right? Why, who creates the moral framework surrounding a war? Is it man, or is it actually something else? Is it God per se? And I believe, this is my personal stance on the morals versus morality argument, I believe that morals are created by God and we should follow morals. Morality is created by man. So when John Spencer is talking about Dave Smith's version of morality per se, he's talking about man's version, man deciding what is right versus what is wrong. And when you look at the moral framework and you compare it to morality, you're going to obviously find a lot of flaws, because man is flawed. We're inherently and definitely flawed. I am flawed. You guys are flawed. And, well, Dave Smith is definitely flawed as well. So let's look at what John Spencer had to say about this. The failed logic in Dave Smith's morality of war. Dave Smith, a libertarian comic, has taken to the world's biggest podcast, including a recent debate with me on Piers Morgan Uncensored, which didn't go really well. John Spencer demolished Dave Smith. It was like really interesting to watch a child go up against an adult, and Dave Smith being the child, and like in that scenario, and Piers just watching on going, I love this. This is going to get me lots of views. Keep going. To argue that war should be judged by the same moral logic as domestic murder. He claims war is just a word politicians use to seize power, not a meaningful shift in moral reality. Spoiler alert, there is a major difference between domestic violence or domestic murder versus actual war. Obviously, there is death involved, but still, domestic murder is different to that of an actual war. Given the size of his audience and the intensity of public reaction, it's worth answering his claims head on. On Joe Rogan's podcast, Smith laid out what he called a simple moral argument. Let's say somebody broke onto your property and killed your family members, and you want to go kill this guy. If he goes back to his apartment building and there's a woman and children inside, and your move is to blow up the building, well, what you'd be charged with is murder in the first degree. You drop the bomb knowing innocent people were going to die. That is a definite definition of intentional. The analogy might sound persuasive, especially in the age of gut-wrenching war footage on our smartphones. What Dave is trying to do is make an appeal to emotion. Okay, we'll keep that in mind as we keep going. like when we're looking at gut-wrenching war footage on our smartphones, obviously it's going to make us move and feel things, right? You did drop a bomb knowing innocents would die after all. But this is a rhetorical sleight of hand. It confuses a linguistic truth that harm was foreseeable with a moral falsehood that the act is inherently wrong no matter the context. Yes, at an obvious level, the actual pressing of the button while knowing innocents were in the vicinity is intentional. But as a profound point beyond linguistic tautology, the implied idea that no matter what the surrounding circumstances, it is always immoral to press that button is preposterous. To see how absurd Smith's logic is, simply flip the numbers. Suppose you knew there was a 9/8 operatives inside a building actively planning attacks, along with 2 innocent babies. Dropping a bomb on that building would still be intentional and done with the full knowledge that those babies would die. Even in this reverse scenario, only a moral extremist could fail to see what's wrong with Smith's claim. The central issue is the confusion of the 2 entirely separate systems: civilian criminal law on the one hand and the conduct of war on the other hand. You've got, when it comes down to civilian criminal law, that is completely different to that of actual warlike conduct. There's 2 different playbooks you've got to look for. But what humans are very good at doing is going, I understand the criminal law framework because that's easier to understand. I know because from my standpoint, morality dictates that this is in fact wrong. And obviously the moral argument to be had as well is that God sees that killing or taking innocent life is wrong, definitely. Then you have, on the other hand, the war scenario, the war playbook that not many people truly understand. Yes, all war is wrong. It's horrendous. But war is obviously necessary in some parts, especially if you are defending yourself against terror or against someone that doesn't want you to exist. So obviously there is going to be a little bit of a different morality sort of ideological bent to when someone is at war versus when someone is in a domestic violence situation. These exist for different purposes under different real world constraints and by practical necessity are governed by different rules. Not accounting for such different conditions is a kind of moral blindness. I actually agree. Domestically, we rely on police and courts to uphold moral and legal order. More morality and legal order, I should say. If someone commits, but then again, some laws are based on a moral framework with how God structured everything and what we know to be true. And then obviously there's some other laws that man has decided to instill for themselves. And obviously they see that as their own form of justice, right? If someone commits murder, the system investigates, arrests, and prosecutes. That model breaks down in war. You can't arrest an invading army or call 911 when rockets are incoming. As your government to longer holds a monopoly on the use of force. Therefore, what would have been criminal violence is necessary to neutralize the threat. This is why the law of armed conflict exists, often referred to as international humanitarian law. Smith seemed to think my referring to laws rather than moral principles was, per se, a way to weasel out of moral thinking. It's not. But this is a total inversion. Appealing to the LOAC, the International Humanitarian Law, or the Armed Conflict LOAC version, is not an abandonment of morality, but an attempt to preserve it under the worst human conditions, as opposed to pretending away the moral relevance of those conditions. And while it operates through legal language, LOAC is grounded in basic moral truths. The law of war is not a loophole in morality. It is morality under fire. It rests on 3 foundational principles: distinction, proportionality, and precaution. You may only target enemy combatants or civilians directly participating in hostilities. Civilian harm may not be excessive in relation to the anticipated military advantage, and every feasible step must be taken to minimize civilian casualties. I personally do not think for 1 second that Israel's going in knowing full well how many babies there are. I personally do not think that they're going in and willfully just murdering every single one of them. I do not for 1 second think that at all. Does that mean that atrocities aren't being committed? No, because there are definitely atrocities being committed. But if it weren't for Hamas hiding behind children, that's where it becomes a very tricky situation. You're going to be accused one way or another of being a horrible, despicable, vile nation if you are killing babies. Just it's how it goes. But the actual enemy, the terror group that is hiding behind them, for some reason, they're not considered to be vile either, which is amazing, right? These are codified moral imperatives that grew out of centuries of moral and legal reasoning about what exactly a good person or group is to do when confronted by a systemic lethal violence emanating from a different society, group, or country. We have different laws to that of over in Israel and how Hamas operates. That is just the truth. From Thomas Aquinas, who articulated the principles of just cause and right intention, to Hugo Grotius, who laid the legal groundwork for distinguishing combatants from civilians, the greatest minds on war have insisted that armed conflict must be governed by reason and ethics. Bit hard to do that when you've got a terror group, right? That doesn't really have anything to do with reason or ethics at all. I don't care about either of that. In war, applied morality legitimizes certain acts of violence that would be criminal in peacetime, but only within the strict bounds of moral and legal constraints. These ideas were in place long before modern international law was even a thing, but they remain central to it. Smith ignores all of this. He frames war as an act of personal vengeance. You wanted to get some guy, so you blew up the building. But this bears no resemblance to how modern, law-abiding militaries operate, nor to how morality governs war. The reality is war sucks, okay? But that doesn't mean there aren't some good people out there trying to defend our way of life from another different culture that doesn't want our way of life to exist. I much rather would side with my country trying to defend or trying to eliminate a other culture or civilization that doesn't want me to exist, because they've probably got the same kind of viewpoint with us, trying to eliminate us. They don't want us to be around. They hate us. So yes, that's when military force is justified, I believe, personally. Still makes war a horrible thing, and I cannot stand it. Either way, two things can be true at the same time, can they not? Liberal democratic forces are bound by rigorous legal and ethical standards. Targets must be lawfully military objectives. Civilian harm must not be excessive in relation to the anticipated military advantage. And commanders must take all feasible precautions to minimize harm. That includes issuing warnings, using precision munitions, or delaying strikes when civilians are present. From this account of the IDF's actions, though, these standards apply across all liberal democracies. It's unclear whether Smith knows such assessments are conducted, let alone that entire units are dedicated to them. But they are. I've watched these assessments carried out repeatedly throughout this war. Even the criminal law Smith appeals to recognize moral nuance. Killing can be murder, manslaughter, or no crime at all, depending on intent and circumstance. Someone acting in self-defense isn't charged as a murderer, even if someone else is harmed. The law of war applies the same logic, but under far more extreme and complex conditions. To be clear, this isn't personal. I'm dressing the arguments, not the man. But Smith represents a growing genre of pundits with massive platforms who wield moral outrage without understanding what they're condemning. Again, like I said in the very beginning, emotion plays a very important role in this. We are emotional human beings, but you've got to also understand there is definitely a reason and rationale that needs to come into play as well. And that's why having loads of these comedians, yes, they're allowed to give their opinion, but on the biggest stage imaginable and leading people astray, that's when you need John Spencer to come in and go, no, here's why it's wrong. Here's why you need to look at it from this perspective, because this perspective is actually the right perspective. They conflate war with crime, tactics and atrocities, and lawful military actions with, you know what, while offering no serious alternatives. Giving Hamas a state as a reward for October 7th is not a policy. These aren't just bad arguments. They're dangerously shallow, and they should be rejected outright. I agree with what John Spencer is saying. Like he said, he's not attacking the man, he's attacking the viewpoint. And that's exactly what I do all the time. If someone is saying something that makes absolutely no sense, goes against any sort of logic whatsoever, I will go after that and call out the person for saying such a thing, because they should know better, but they don't. Alas, we live in that kind of time where you have lots of these people that are bad faith individuals that should know they actually have been taught the truth, but they've gone against it because they've got a particular agenda to them. And I think that is the wrong way to go about it. The way I see the Israel and Hamas conflict is I don't want terror to exist. I want Israel to do the best job they possibly can to remove terror. That does not make criticizing Israel a crime at all. You're allowed to criticize Israel. But the problem is when you've got a very tricky situation like this, where the morality framework, as well as the kinds of crimes that are being committed in sort of a warlike setting, I don't believe that they're really committing warlike crimes, to be completely honest with you. I think they are doing the very best they can because they are following the humanitarian law, even though loads of people are bent up on emotion and they're saying they're not. I believe from what I've seen, and again, I haven't been, I think if I were to go, that's why I listen to people like Douglas Murray, who I trust, who has actually been and seen what these people have done, then yes, you have a personal first-hand account, which is a lot better than a second-hand account that I'm seeing on a propaganda screen, which is what Dave Smith is oftentimes looking at. So anyway, that's enough from me, but I thought I would share my thoughts on this. But you guys take care, you be blessed, and I'll see you all in the next video.